Thank you very much, Nick. One of the roles as chairman is to introduce my panelists. You have already done that for me, so that's one ticked off, a time-saving device. I would like to use my chairman's prerogative just to say a few words about why this topic is important. Why unlisted companies, why family businesses have corporate governance issues that need to be considered and need to be addressed. I'd like to take a historical perspective to this. This was prompted by the fact that last week I received an email which was inviting me to some of the celebrations that were taking place in 2012, believe it or not, for Sir Adrian Cadbury and his 20th anniversary of publishing the original financial aspects of corporate governance code in the UK in 1992. The situation is that we have come a long way in 20 years. In the GCC region, we have come a long way in the last 10 years specifically. And I think we started out on this journey of corporate governance looking at processes, looking at structures, and looking at the corporate governance framework. And we identified that not necessarily one size fits all, and that we would go down a principal route in terms of comply or explain, and a regulatory route in terms of making certain things mandatory. Once we had introduced codes, and Oman was the first to introduce a code in the GCC. The next move on from producing the codes, which tended to look at listed companies, was then to look at the state-owned enterprises. And we've had the previous presentation look at the state-owned enterprises, and that was particularly stimulated by the work that the OECD did in terms of the guidelines for state-owned enterprises. And we're very grateful for the work that Grant and his team did on SOEs. But what I'm seeing in the last few years is a move towards looking at the most numerous area of business activity. There are more unlisted companies, there are more family businesses than there are listed companies. And these areas of activity should develop some form of governance structures and processes. We saw about 5 years ago the first unlisted codes being developed. Belgium were one of the first. Lebanon followed with a very good set of codes and recommendations. And more recently, we've seen particular activities taking place in the region. And the most recent code that I've seen is the ECODA one, the European Confederation of Company Directors Associations, and they brought out one at Easter of this year, which was a very interesting one because it introduced the idea of phases into a life cycle model of business, particularly for the unlisted sector and family business. And the ECODA code also looked at complex unlisted companies who were outside much of the mandatory legislation that was existing. So this is a very hot an important area that countries are now looking at and trying to sort out frameworks, structures and processes, and I'm looking forward to the debate that's going to take place. In order for you to identify whether or not family businesses and unlisted businesses are different, and I'm hoping that we will be able to resolve that answer fairly resoundingly in the next 40 minutes or so. Now, I'd like to break with tradition in terms of this order, and I'd like to say that ladies come first, and Amina Benjaloun would like to tell us about the story that is happening in Morocco, that she's been playing a leading part in terms of the corporate governance developments in Morocco. Please, Amina, the floor is yours.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président. Sayyidati Sadati, assalamu alaikum. Alors, permettez-moi tout d'abord de remercier l'Institut Hawkamah, l'OCDE et l'autorité omanaise du marché financier d'avoir invité le Maroc à venir présenter dans cette très importante conférence les avancées réalisées en matière de gouvernance d'entreprise et particulièrement la gouvernance des PME et des entreprises familiales. Alors, à titre de rappel, au Maroc, une prise de conscience importante a conduit en février 2007 à la mise en place d'une commission nationale gouvernance d'entreprise, commission qui est publique-privée, présidée conjointement par la Confédération des entreprises au Maroc et le ministère des Affaires économiques, et qui réunit les acteurs clés publics et privés en matière de gouvernance d'entreprise. Alors, cette commission a publié en mars 2008, une année plus tard, après sa mise en place, un code général de gouvernance d'entreprise qui s'adresse à toutes les entreprises et qui constitue en fait un référentiel de base en matière de gouvernance d'entreprise. Nous avons fait suivre ce code général environ 9 mois plus tard, en décembre 2008, par un code spécifique de PME et d'entreprises familiales. Alors, ce que je voudrais partager avec vous, c'est déjà pourquoi. Pourquoi un code PME? Alors, parce que nous nous sommes rendus compte rapidement que dans la pratique, ce premier code que nous avons publié présentait des standards qui étaient élevés et que ces principes s'adressaient en priorité aux sociétés cotées en bourse, aux grandes entreprises structurées, et il nous a donc paru essentiel de publier un code spécifique adapté aux particularités des PME et des entreprises familiales. Deuxième raison essentielle par rapport à la publication de ce code, c'est que, comme vous le savez et comme c'est le cas dans la plupart des pays de la région, les entreprises familiales et les PME constituent la grande majorité du tissu économique de ces pays, et qu'il est essentiel en fait de les voir améliorer leur compétitivité pour contribuer davantage à la croissance économique de nos pays. En fait, troisième raison principale, c'est que ces PME et entreprises familiales présentent des critères spécifiques de gouvernance. Très souvent, on constate une propriété familiale du capital, une concentration du contrôle, un système d'objectifs qui est dominé par les intérêts de la famille et du capital. Et donc, ce code PME, évidemment, n'est pas une formule magique pour résoudre l'ensemble de ces problèmes, mais on le présente plus comme une boîte à outils pour améliorer la performance de nos entreprises. Alors, quelle a été notre démarche? Très brièvement, alors, pour publier ce code, notre démarche, comme je l'ai dit au début, est particulièrement publique privés. Donc les concertations se sont faites dans le cadre de cette commission nationale. Aussi notre approche, et puis on en a parlé, a été basée sur le strict respect des dispositions légales et réglementaires qui existent donc au Maroc. Alors comme c'est le cas donc également en Égypte, le Maroc dispose d'un arsenal juridique et réglementaire qui est important et qui inclut beaucoup de dispositions en fait de gouvernance d'entreprise. Donc nous considérons en fait que ces codes sont un complément de ce qui existe donc à travers la loi, un complément flexible, mais qui ne remplace en aucun cas donc la réglementation qui est en vigueur. Alors notre approche a également fait appel à l'expertise internationale, et là je remercie l'OCDE qui nous a donc accompagnés d'une manière très approfondie pour la publication de nos codes, le Global Forum également pour la gouvernance d'entreprise, pour être sûr en fait que nos codes soient aux standards internationaux, mais nous avons veillé également à ce qu'ils soient adaptés au contexte national, bien évidemment, à travers une large consultation des différentes parties prenantes. Alors, comment donc on applique ce code au niveau national? Alors déjà, ce que nous disons, c'est que l'application de ce code des PME et des entreprises familiales est avant tout volontaire. Volontaire, oui, mais qui doit être accompagnée, en fait, pour que les dispositions de gouvernance soient bien connues, bien comprises par les entreprises et qu'elles soient effectivement traduites donc sur le terrain et dans la pratique. En fait, tout simplement, il faut en parler tout le temps sur le terrain pour que les entreprises donc assimilent bien ces dispositions. Et nous avons dans ce sens donc mené au Maroc une large campagne, et nous continuons à le faire, de sensibilisation, de vulgarisation donc autour des principes de bonne gouvernance, et nous avons associé donc l'ensemble des parties prenantes, à savoir à la fois donc le secteur privé, donc les associations professionnelles, mais également les auditeurs, les commissaires aux comptes, les experts comptables qui sont le plus proches donc finalement de ces entreprises, le secteur bancaire également, le gouvernement qui apporte un soutien donc institutionnel fort à toutes ces actions de communication. Et enfin, et pas des moindres, donc nous avons créé également en juin 2009 dernier l'Institut donc marocain des administrateurs, dont la principale fonction est de former donc les administrateurs aux principes de bonne gouvernance, et donc de les former aussi à l'exercice de leurs activités en qualité d'administrateurs, et de diffuser, sensibiliser donc à la bonne gouvernance de manière générale. Donc voilà en bref en fait ce que je voulais dire sur l'évolution au Maroc, et je voudrais peut-être conclure en disant que la gouvernance d'entreprise en fait en appelle d'abord et avant tout à la responsabilité individuelle et à l'implication en fait personnelle de chaque entrepreneur donc qui souhaite s'inscrire dans une démarche de progrès et dans un objectif donc de création de valeur pour son entreprise. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. I'm going to use the same methodology that Stefan did with the state-owned enterprises, and if I may reserve all of the questions until after we have all four of the speakers talk about very interrelated matters associated with unlisted companies and family businesses. So if I may, I'd like to call upon Alvaro Abella, who's going to be looking at it from a private equity perspective with his role from being director in Gulf Capital. Alvaro.
Well, I'm going to throw out a simplistic statement and risking not being as invigorating as that brief exercise. But I think the main question of the panel here was, what are the corporate governance challenges faced by these type of companies? Well, I would say that these challenges are not much different than most of these companies have faced in the past, the past 150 years, or even in recent times. I'd like to take two examples from a book recently from the Hopper brothers, where they talk about DuPont at the turn of the 20th century, and ArcelorMittal recently at the beginning of the third millennium. So I think that the main challenge is still the succession planning and the sustainability of those businesses, which typically require a changing of different skill sets to address the changing environment. If we take a look at DuPont, they actually say on their website that it's interesting. The quote: "Tradition is all right when business conditions are stable and predictable. In dynamic or uncertain times, however, old approaches are at best irrelevant and at worst destructive." To create a modern organization at the start of the 20th century, Pierre DuPont wanted to separate the day-to-day running of the firm from the evaluation of the effectiveness of each unit and strategic thinking about future directions. Thus, he created an executive committee to fulfill these latter goals. So what we're trying to say is, you have a lot of businesses that are saying, so how can I address these two challenges, and how can I bring in management from outside, independent thinking, et cetera, et cetera? Well, DuPont started this by giving stock options to non-family members. I think today, well, there's actually only one family member, and he sits there as a non-executive. The rest are obviously all independent. Another example, closer to our times today, is Mittal Steel. Well, a lot of people, when the transaction was going through in 2006, were concerned about, well, how will Mittal lead corporate governance in such a huge entity? At that time, before the merger, the Mittal family owned 88% of the shares, and basically the business was supervised by most of the family members. Today, some of those concerns have been addressed. Actually, the board of Mittal is comprised of 9 members, 6 of which are independent. One of them is actually, interestingly enough, Jeannot Creke, who was the former Luxembourg Minister of Economics and Trade, and who at the time of the transaction had stated that the social and cultural model of Arcelor had the Luxembourg's government full support. So I guess there must have been some reticence, but again, the fact that he's now joined the board must be that they're doing something right. So just to end, what I think, to hear a little pitch on the private equity industry, what is it that we bring for these type of businesses? I think there's a big difference between how PE firms see and how the family businesses see eye to eye. Family business are obviously much more long term, and private equity businesses, well, we have a 3 to 5 holding year period. And we need to do everything in that time. We need to run, we need to cut, we need to expand, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously at times there can be tensions. In our view, the answer is, well, we have to define and jointly agree on a set of actions over the holding period, as well as an agreement on route to exit and how to manage the business during the holding period. I think that's probably the greatest value that PE firms bring to these type of businesses, which is the discipline in corporate governance, specifically on the transparency and information flow, as well as the opportunity to act as a public company without the pressures of a public company. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvaro, for the private equity perspective. I'd like to now move on to the family business perspective and introduce you to Walid, who's the founder and managing director of the Family Business Advisory Group. Walid.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. I tend to look at the world a bit differently, in the sense that we tend to focus mostly on corporate governance as such. I have the privilege of working with families in business, and when invited in, I tend to get closer to the families as such, the family members as such, and look at the world from the inside out, as opposed from the outside in. And what we see today in 2010 is a series of families that are sometimes scared of the future. The families that I work with, family businesses that I've worked with over the past 12 or 13 years now, have been established just after the Second World War, the modern GCC or the modern MENA region that we know and that we are living in. The crisis that hit the world over the past 2-3 years have unveiled something that the families in this part of the world have not lived through before. They have been hit at 3 fronts. One, at the level of their businesses. They don't generate as much income as they used to before, and they are no longer as successful as before, and they are being challenged in their home turf. Number 2, with respect to the investments that they have made, the private equity, the wealth management, whatever you call it, the portfolio investments they have made, they have been hit at that level. And the third level is the savings. Traditionally, most families in business and most high net worth individuals have bank accounts overseas or locally that they use to basically spend, or they generate revenue on this from interest rates. And today the interest rates are at rock bottom. So they are basically being hit at the 3 levels, and they need to be more creative and more challenged. Yes, they have issues with respect to corporate governance, but in my book and the way I look at it, it is becoming increasingly important to look at the challenges from within. The fault lies with us, Brutus, in the sense that the families sometimes tend to, or we tend to, because this is part of our culture, to blame others for our ills. But family governance, as I call it, as opposed to corporate governance, has as much a stake or has to be looked into as much as we are looking into corporate governance. Corporate governance, for me, it's easily addressed in the sense that you can just look at a book and figure out what is the role of a shareholder, what is the role of a chairman, what is the role of a CEO, and so on and so forth, get training, and eventually try to apply it, and then with trials and errors, you adapt it to your needs. But what is more important is the family governance, the family aspect, the things that go on behind the scenes, the role of the father, the role of the seniors vis-a-vis the juniors, the cultural challenges we're going through, the girls getting educated, the girls demanding their seat at the table with the boys. We are challenging primogeniture, we are challenging senior fathers. But there is one thing lacking. We are lacking some centers of excellence in this part of the world, and we are lacking young boys and girls who are willing to take charge of their future. Today, the families that I mentioned have been established 3, 4, 5, 6 decades ago. The patriarchs are still alive. None of their children are willing to challenge. We are at generation 4. Where are we going from here? And this is where I believe, from my work with the families and my work with financial institutions and government bodies, that the future lies in a PPP, a partnership between the public and the private enterprise. On the one hand, the public enterprise, and we listed a bit earlier some successes in the public field. These should be taken as examples for families and for entrepreneurs and for young boys and girls who are rich in their own right, to take their future in their hands and embark in a new adventure. The financial sector has a great role to play. We talked a lot today about risk management. Yes, governance, family governance, corporate governance within families and business is a matter of risk management for the financial institutions who have traditionally been lending money and partnering with these families on name lending basis. Now there is a new page they have to look at. They need to clean up their accounts. They need to be more responsible. They need to push these families and family enterprises to become more institutionalized as such. And the last leg of it is that families in business and governments need to look at family governance and corporate governance for families in business as a corporate social responsibility affair. Those families represent the major power in our economies. They generate a lot of revenue. They employ a lot of people. And we have an issue with respect to continuity and sustainability of their activities as they stand today. We need to figure out what is going to happen in the next 50 years. As the statistics say, 50% of the people in this part of the world are below the age of 15. In 5 years from now, these boys and girls would need a roof, would need a job, would need to eat, would need to drink, would need housing, would need clothing. They need a job. Who is going to finance all this? Thank you.
Thank you, Walid. So we've had a presentation about corporate governance developments in Morocco. We've had the private equity perspective. We've had the family business advisory perspective. And now we're moving to a family business. NCA Ruiba Juice. We've got the chairman here, Slim, who's going to be putting a family perspective on matters.
Thanks, Mr. President. When I saw my name at the end of the program of the day, I said I will move out of presenting the experience of a family business with a private equity as an experience in corporate governance, but I'm going to talk in 2 slides, like that we can have a quick lunch, about corporate governance in Algeria. And from a different angle. Most probably some of you didn't approach corporate governance in a way of a dilemma between public governance and corporate governance. Why? Because in economy in transition, like the one that we have in Algeria, we moved from centralized economy to liberal economy. And that moves hurt, I could say, the emerging private sector mainly, and 100% of it was family business owned, because there is a misperception for a socialist country perceiving positively a company is something unbelievable for the first years. So the misperception of the private sector and the family-owned company have led those companies into the informal sector. So moving them from informal to formal is difficult if you have a public governance not effective. When I talk about public governance, you understand my meaning regarding also corruption at the government level. So when you have a family-owned company, public sectors, private companies, a private sector looking at the behavior of the people at the government level, it happens that those people don't want to show corporate governance practices in their companies. Things have changed, fortunately for us, because a few years ago, and exactly in 2007, we had in mind a group of entrepreneurs to change that misperception. Because we said, we have to change that dilemma, we have to change the position of the arrows to make that virtuous circle and to make that mechanism works. We, as private sector, have to make the first move. And we decided to look at corporate governance as an important tool to change the behavior and the misperception of the government, and most probably to lead also the government to more public governance. We have done it in participation by making the government participating to our project. The first meeting we held it, we had 250 people, the majority of them private sector, but we have a lot of officials from the Algerian government, and when they saw what we had in mind, they decided to support us. So this is our first success. The second one is that We got funds from the government, we got funds from SAIP to help us producing the first Algerian Code of Corporate Governance. Because we haven't any experience in writing a Code of Corporate Governance, we wrote a simplified code of corporate governance just to say at least we have a product now, at least we have a basis on which we can work on. Could you move to the next slide, please, just to show the sequences? Okay. In second, what we have done, we've made a huge campaign of awareness at the country level by informing people what is corporate governance, etc. And we always receive the same question, but corporate governance didn't apply to us because 40% of our economy is informal. How you can bring informal companies to be formal? So we told them it will be steps we're gonna go through, and don't be pushy regarding that point. Second, because we don't know exactly the situation of corporate governance practices in Algeria, we decided to lead a survey, which was led this summer, and at the end of the survey, we decided also to open the Algerian Institute of Corporate Governance, again with the support of government. What we started seeing is that even at the government level, corporate governance practices or public governance started showing strong signs. The President Bouteflika have set the Commission Against Corruption. So this is a very, very strong signal for us, and we need now to go ahead with the corporate governance project in Algeria, and we will rely strongly on that new institute. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so we've heard from two case studies, Algeria and Morocco, as to what they're doing in the area of unlisted and family business. We've heard a private equity perspective, and we've heard the Family Business Advisory Group. They've said some provocative things. Would anybody like to pick up on any of those issues and ask any questions to the panelists?
Good afternoon. I represent Bank Dhofar, heading compliance. I have a question. In case of listed companies, board and management runs the business on behalf of shareholders. The corporate governance code, including transparency and disclosure, are important in listed companies to add shareholder value. For whom the corporate governance code should be put in place for family-owned business? Instead, should we not encourage such businesses to get listed? I mean, the logic behind transparency and disclosure for family-owned businesses.
So if I could extend that question, perhaps you're saying that family businesses are those that have yet to grow into listed companies, and that before they become listed companies, they have got to go through some sort of process to recognise the importance of shareholders and the rigour associated with reporting to those shareholders. Slim, would you like to start off the discussion?
Yes. I really don't understand clearly the question. Again, do you mean that family-owned companies, it's important for family-owned companies to be transparent, and why they need to be transparent? Okay. I went through this exercise because in my company, I had the biggest dilemma that faced family-owned company, especially in the Arab world where it's a patriarchal system. when you have shareholders, the father, the uncles, the cousins, each one of them holds a stake in the company at different level. When it comes to splitting the incomes of the company, the legal incomes and the non-declared incomes, because sometimes in companies you have non-declared incomes. I'm not talking about a company that practice corporate governance rules. When it comes to that point, it happens that some people who hold, as an example, 10% of shares didn't get 10% of the income in total. He gets probably 0 or sometimes 0.5%. Why? Because the boss, the patriarchal of the company, take everything, because there is a sort of redistribution to the other members of the family, even non-shareholders of the company. So, again, to go back to the point of the transparency, it is important to say we're going to stop that. But by saying we're going to stop that, we're going to go against the culture of our region, especially the culture of my country in Algeria. I don't know in the other MENA region, but I think it's the same. We're going against the culture by putting in practice those transparency. It doesn't mean we don't have to do it, but we should be careful with local culture.
Thank you. Walid, I'm sure you're asked this question on many occasions. How do you answer it?
The question is recurring in this part of the world because we had several waves of advice coming to this part. Some people had said at one point that, well, you all know that in this part of the world sometimes the legal system does not follow the needs of corporates, and we have a kind of a system sometimes that does not evolve with the needs of the business people. It has been put in place many moons ago to cater to the needs of traders, but now the business has expanded over trading, and we need to catch up. The legal system needs to catch up. Very often, some people said that the solution is to set up a holding company and a private joint stock company, because the private joint stock company imposes on the parties certain governance rules, and you need to apply them. Then we had another wave of people saying, well, salvation is in going public. Family businesses, once they go public, that's it. This solves all the problems, all the ills, all the fighting within the family businesses. I beg to differ on this angle. The only way corporate governance could be introduced in a proper way is by educating and coaching and helping changing the mindsets within family businesses. Because as Mr. Slim just mentioned, it's a patriarchal society whereby me, myself, and I created this thing. It is mine. So we need to go through the process, and again, it's a long-term process, to distinguish or separate the ownership or the family from the body, which is the business as such. And this is where the exercise comes in place. And this is why I was mentioning earlier that corporate governance is easy on paper, but then the most important part and the crucial part and the most complicated part is the mindset, is the family. Extract the family, make the business an investment portfolio, an investment, as opposed to being as integral part of the family as such. The family has to dissociate itself from this cash cow or from this business that the father or the grandfather has put in place. And perhaps then they are readier and they become readier to go public.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask Alvaro and Amina to answer the next question, because I can see another question there.
Yeah, my name is Luay from Oman Arab Bank. Actually, having said that about family business, and especially in Middle East, family business houses, they manage to run their companies at least for the last 40 to 50 years, and it's most of them successful. But still, we said, in certain areas we have to educate them, even though most of the family houses, they are engaged or participate or investing in public listed companies and has been represented in most of these companies. When we do an IPO or transfer an LLC company to SOG company, we spend a lot of time with the legal, with compliance, in order to make sure those companies, they are ready and aware of compliance. But I believe one of the issues to encourage family houses or to push family houses to implement or adopt corporate governance, even without listing their companies in the market, starting from financial sector. You know, for example, a country like Oman, for any individual or a company who would like to grant or take a loan above 250,000 Omani Riyal, they have to come up with audited balance sheet, which means that if we ask through the regulators, especially it's important, so important for banks to adopt or to push family houses, especially the big names, to adopt corporate governance in order to be more transparent in terms of operation, in terms of efficiency, in terms of financials. I believe we can take the regulators' angle to push and improve corporate governance with non-listed companies. Thank you.
Well, that has both policy implications and equity implications. And I'd like to ask MENA, firstly, to respond to that from a policy perspective.
Ok, alors peut-être pour répondre à cette question, je vais faire référence donc au code marocain donc de bonne pratique à l'attention des entreprises familiales, où justement les principales recommandations donc de ce code visent à améliorer le mode de gouvernance, préparer une succession, mais également favoriser l'ouverture du capital donc de ces entreprises familiales, sans pour autant parler d'une cotation en bourse. Alors, bien évidemment, alors quand on dit donc ouverture du capital, on pense à côté de cela, je dirais, contractualisation de pactes d'actionnaires entre donc les nouveaux actionnaires dans cette entreprise qui fixent en fait des règles de bonne gouvernance au sein de l'entreprise. Donc le fait d'ouvrir son capital va favoriser l'introduction de nouvelles règles de bonne gouvernance au sein de l'entreprise. De la même manière, donc l'adoption de bonnes pratiques de gouvernance favorise une cotation donc en bourse. Et cela, en fait, c'est le cas, je pense, dans une grande majorité des pays de la région. Le principal frein donc, à une cotation en bourse est justement ce manque de culture boursière. On a parlé de gouvernance d'entreprise en tant que culture. L'introduction en bourse est également une culture qui manque en fait chez nos investisseurs, d'où là aussi un effort continu de pédagogie, de sensibilisation aux avantages donc d'une cotation en bourse en tant que levier de financement de l'entreprise qui peut être complémentaire donc aux autres financements dont elle bénéficie.
Merci. Merci. Alvaro, your response.
Yeah. I'll make this brief. I agree. If the question is, should financial services and financial industry take a more active role in at least a supervisory function, the answer is yes, I agree.
If I could actually just add, I mean, part of the bank corporate governance, the policy brief that we issued, it actually talked about the cascading effect of corporate governance within the banks. And it calls for the central banks to create the framework for such an effect to happen, to be able to create the other incentives.
Okay, thanks, Nick. And can we go to the questions now to ask the panel, please? Okay, does the region need codes targeted specifically at unlisted family-owned companies of certain size? You've got two options that say yes and two options that say no. First option is yes, they're useful complement to the general codes that apply generally across the whole sectors. The second response is they are necessary regardless of whether or not there is a general corporate governance code. Third, no, governance of such companies should be covered by the general corporate governance code. And fourth, no, the basic corporate governance elements are for such companies that are already outlined in company legislation. Which of the four do you think is true?
Right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's a combination of the yeses.
If you combine the two, that's 73%, three-quarters, believe that the region needs codes for unlisted family-owned companies. Whether or not they're a complement or whether or not they're necessary on their own, you've got a split between the two. But that gives clear evidence that there is a need for unlisted family-owned companies. So I think, ladies, gentlemen, you've proved your case in terms of the presentations that you've made. The second question, please. How can the governance of large unlisted companies be best addressed? Through the Companies Law, and additional regulations, by providing companies with incentives to list their debt and equity, and fourthly, through corporate governance requirements mandated by banks and private equity, or private companies should be free to decide their own governance practices, a laissez-faire perspective. Which of the five do you believe is the case?
Okay, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
46 have gone for 2. And 2 was through the Companies Law and additional regulations. Would you like panel members to comment upon that and make any closing remarks, please?
Well, I think a gentleman in one of the previous sessions mentioned that we've come a long way, and there's still a long way to go. So I would tend to disagree with the 46%. Unfortunately, I'm going to take a divergent view, but I think you need still a little bit of flexibility in the region, and you need to go through the motions, the different stages, to be able to get to, tighter control regulations. I would actually put my vote on number 4, where if you have requirements and you have somebody giving that, I think somebody else talked about the carrot and the stick, well, you might be a little bit more effective.
Yeah, I will take you back to my first slide. I think, again, that there is no corporate governance in a country without public governance. So it needs to have those two works hand in hand. And that's why flexibility is important, but also regulation is important. So we need to find the right balance between both to have corporate governance effective in a country, and we need to have also a public governance effective to show the example to corporates. Thank you.
Alors, je crois que ce qui est clair et ce qui ressort donc dans ce vote, c'est qu'il est nécessaire donc d'avoir des dispositions spécifiques pour cette catégorie donc d'entreprises. Maintenant, par rapport à l'approche volontaire ou l'approche réglementaire, nous ce que nous disons, c'est que l'application, la stricte application de la loi est un minimum en fait, et que la gouvernance d'entreprise vient en complément et au-dessus et explicite en fait la manière finalement de se comporter donc face à ces réglementations et à ces lois.
I personally believe that education, transparency, and the need to open the books, so-called open the books, would be the salvation and will help us move forward with respect to governance. I tend to agree more with number 4 than with number 2, and because it's the market that's going to regulate the needs and push the corporations, whether they are family-owned or otherwise, to perform better in the interest of the society at large.
And finally, from me, my thoughts are that law is important. In UK, in my own country, we have a Companies Act, the 2006 Companies Act, which is over 750 pages long, and we often forget that company legislation and regulation has got to be there as a foundation, a solid foundation for good corporate governance practices. On top of that, I believe in codes. I believe that they should be, in terms of comply or explain situations to the businesses, because I don't believe one size necessarily fits all, and I don't necessarily believe that mandatory is the only method of dealing with corporate governance matters. And I do strongly recommend you to look at the ACODA code that has just been produced, because that allows for many different sizes, many different views and recommendations over the split between chairmen and CEOs, the use of committees, the use of non-executive directors, and so on, based upon the life cycle that the unlisted company actually finds itself in. And there are different appropriate solutions based upon the situation and the context that that organisation is situated in at that moment in time. And in 5 years' time, the situation and the context may change, and the solutions and the corporate governance practices and systems may well need to be different. So the perspective, I think, from the panel is generally both law's important, the codes are important, and the families themselves must play an active part in corporate governance changes as time progresses. And on that note, I will finish this morning and this afternoon's perspective. Thank you very much for your patience, particularly concerning the meal time, and the very fact that there are so many people still remaining here, I think, is a reflection on the strength of the panel. Thank you very much.
And please join me in thanking the panel, please. Thank you very much. All right, just a few announcements. Tomorrow, I mean, there were a lot of the discussions that happened this morning, particularly from I thought, from some of the point that Slim mentioned, feeds very much to the discussions we're going to have tomorrow. We're going to have a discussion on the governance of the regulators, who guards the guardians. We're going to have a more in-depth understanding of what has been the secret behind the Omanis and the success that they've had in developing this corporate governance codes and pushing ahead and being a leader in corporate governance. We're going to have another discussion on the role of stock exchanges. And then we're going to have a discussion on the environment, social, and governance, which was alluded to by Dr. Ashraf, Dr. Saidi this morning. And then we're going to be issuing a Muscat declaration. So all of these opinions that you have given us will help informing the Muscat Declaration, which will be the agenda for Hawkamah, the OECD, and other corporate governance institutions that are engaged with us in this work, in the journey, as was mentioned earlier, in advancing corporate governance in the region. This will be the basis of what we will be doing in the next couple of years. We've done so with a Dubai Declaration when Hawkamah got started in 2006. We updated it with a Doha Declaration in 2008. And then, inshallah, with 2010, a Muscat Declaration. So we're going to be doing a lot of that. Now, announcements and logistics. Those that are expecting a certificate of attendance, you need to sign a form outside. Make sure we need to prove that you were here today and tomorrow. So there are forms that you need to sign. There's a desk out there. Make sure you sign. Second, the lunch will be served at the Pearl Room. That's one level up. There will be signage as well to take you up to the room. The lunch is being sponsored by Oman Arab Bank for today, which we're very, very thankful for. And then the third announcement is the regulators and government representatives that are here. You should have already received an invitation for the Forum for Insolvency Reform in the MENA region meeting, which will be happening at 3:30. It used to be at 3. We're moving it to 3:30 so you could have lunch. That will be in the Mazoon room at 3:30 this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your patience, and bon appetit.